Good evening to the former Conservative Shadow Home Secretary David Davis. David, good evening.
Good evening.
And also good evening to Barry Gardiner, who's the Labour MP for Brent North. Good evening.
Hi.
I'll come to you boys in a second. First, I just want to gauge what people think about this evening. If you're picking up the phone, give us a call, 0500 909 693. Jonathan's in Swansea. Hi, Jonathan.
Hello.
Hi, and let's also say hello to Eamon, who's in London. Hi, Eamon.
Good evening.
Jonathan, prisoners getting the vote. What do you want your MP to do this week when this is debated?
Well, I'm glad you brought up my MP. I'm against prisoners having the vote because everyone has responsibilities as well as rights. And if you fail to take your responsibility seriously and harm someone else, then you deserve to lose your rights and privileges, including the right to vote. I was very pleased that most of the MPs in Parliament voted against giving prisoners the vote last time out, but unfortunately my own local MP defied the will of his constituents and voted in favour of giving these criminals the vote.
Eamon, respond to Jonathan.
Well, I couldn't disagree with Jonathan more. I phoned in because I firmly believe in a basic truth that in a proper democracy, everyone gets to vote. And if you decide to take the vote away from the people that you do not like, then that way leads to oppression.
But how would you respond to what Jonathan said? Jonathan said, these are the people who cannot behave, so why should they have the right to vote?
Prisoners are still part of society. They are in prison subject to society's rules. And we cannot just decide we're going to take away the vote from people we don't like. That's a slippery slope that leads to oppression and division.
Jonathan, I could argue with you. It's also part of their rehabilitation.
Well, that's a feeble argument. As the previous caller said, we all have to live by rules. And these people broke the rules. It's not a question of liking or hating someone. It is a question of what's right and wrong.
Yeah, but we signed up to this. We signed up to this. These are the rules of the European Courts of Human Rights, and we signed up to them.
But, Jonathan, by extension, you could decide that there were other rules that people could, if they broke them, have their votes taken away. And where is it going to lead to? You're going to end up with anybody with a traffic fine not being able to vote, or anybody who does not pay their taxes not being able to vote. You'll have people being denied their votes the way they are in large portions of the southern states of America for one reason or another, just to gerrymandering results.
We're not talking about political prisoners or prisoners of conscience here. We are talking about selfish, greedy, avarice, malicious people who cannot live in society in peace alongside the rest of us.
Wait there, boys. 0500 909 693. If you're picking up the phone this evening, text 85058. Let's just bring in David Davis, former Conservative Shadow Home Secretary. There's a lot of pretty passionate feeling about this, that if people cannot behave in society, then they shouldn't have the vote. That said, they still are people, Mr. Davis, and therefore, is it not part of their rehabilitation to give them rights in society? And that fundamental right is to cast a vote.
Well, the point of rehabilitation is to reduce crime. I mean, are you suggesting that giving people the vote will actually cut crime? I don't think so. The raw truth is these are people who have broken the law, and if you break the law, you shouldn't be part of making the law. These are people who are not in society, as one of your callers said. They're actually being taken out of society, being put in prison. And as the current Shadow Home Secretary said, it's proportionate to say, you lose certain rights. One of those rights is your civic right to vote. It's very clearly the point of view of most people in Britain. It's very clearly the point of view of most MPs. And by the way, I'm afraid you were wrong when you said that we signed up to it. When, in the early 50s, we negotiated the European Convention on Human Rights, we explicitly excluded the issue of so-called universal suffrage because we had people. We actually said in terms, in the language of the day, we said peers, felons, and lunatics were excluded. People who are certified, people who are peers, of course, of the realm, and people who were in prison. And that's how it's been for a very, very long time. And frankly, that's where it should stay.
Yeah, not now though. Barry Gardiner, Labour MP for Brent North. We're talking about the middle, those who are incarcerated here, those who are breaking the law. I'm going to get Barry Gardiner back on in a second because he's just dipped away. Let me go back to Eamon, who's in London. You heard what David Davis said there, Eamon, and he was very clear when he said that there is no appetite for this.
Well, that's a different question as to whether it's right or wrong. I mean, it is true that the populace has been whipped up to say, oh, prisoners have it soft and they shouldn't be given anything. But actually, we're not talking about giving them anything. We're talking about taking away something that, as I said, in a proper democracy, everybody should have. And it's not the fact that they don't have the right to vote affects all of our rights.
But somebody who's serving a life sentence, do you think they have the right to vote? Is that their fundamental right?
I think that as a society, we should give everybody the right to vote, encourage them all to vote and to take part. And the fact that they are in prison or certified under the Mental Health Act doesn't mean that they shouldn't be able to take part.
Barry Gardner's back with us, Labour MP for Brent North. We're talking about people's fundamental rights here, Barry, but I put to you that this is extremely unpopular and it doesn't play out well with the electorate. They don't want to see prisoners getting the right to vote.
I tell you what I think they'll like even less, and that is when the government has to start paying compensation to prisoners because it's ignored the Human Rights Court in Europe. As somebody said earlier, I think it was yourself, that this is an act that we signed up to. In fact, we incorporated it into the UK law. And as a result, the court has to interpret whether we are following the law that we have set out. Now, if we don't, it's quite clear that prisoners will be able to claim compensation. I do not want to see public money spent compensating prisoners for the fact that the government has not allowed them the right to vote.
Well, let me put that directly to David Davis. David Davis, there's a point there behind what Barry Gardner has to say. Yes, maybe people don't want to see prisoners getting the right to vote, but they will be absolutely spitting if prisoners get compensation.
Yeah, it won't happen. I mean, the simple truth is that the court has asked the government to do something. The government is doing what it can do, which is put a bill before the House of Commons. It can do no more than that. It can't instruct me. You know, we're not in a dictatorship. Certain irony in all this. We're not in a dictatorship. It can't instruct me how I should vote, or indeed the rest of the House of Commons how it will vote.
No, that's not the point.
Well, no, let me finish, Barry. You've got the law wrong. So let me just correct it for you, please.
I thought you had finished. It was a very dramatic
No. Let me finish. We're old pals, so let me finish. So the court cannot penalise the government for something it cannot do. In natural law and in justice, it can't do that. And indeed, the British courts will not accept actions against the government if the government can't deliver it. Just as you can't have damages if it's going against primary legislation. That's what, in effect, this is. This is putting primary legislation to the House. If it's turned down, that's the end of it. There will be no compensation. I guarantee you that.
So, Barry Gardner, your fear then will be somewhat aligned, but I suppose the fundamental question, or the foundation question at the basis of this is, why should a court in Europe make up laws for the UK?
That's not the fundamental question, actually. The fundamental question is whether it's right for some prisoners to get the vote. And in my view, it clearly is. If you want to rehabilitate people, if you think that the purpose of prison is not simply to punish, it is to punish, but not simply to punish, but also to rehabilitate them and make them better members of society when they're released from prison, then it strikes me as quite important that you talk to them, or you at least them to have a say about what sort of society it is that they'll be coming out back into. And that is part of rehabilitation, and for that reason I think it makes sense not to allow all prisoners to have the vote.
Who would have the vote?
Well,
in your word, who would have the vote?
One of the options that is being presented to the House on Thursday this week is that those who are serving a sentence of under 4 years should have the vote. I think that's reasonable, and that's what I will be voting
David
for.
Davis, that sounds reasonable. They're going to be out in 4 years' time.
Under 4 years. I mean, do you know what sorts of sentences involve people serving under 4 years? You know, carrying weapons, assault. You want to give those people the vote?
Well, they're going to be out in 4 years, and if it age rehabilitation,
they're going to have it when they come back out. What are you saying?
But then they have served their sentence. That's the whole point. They have served
is it
their
arbitrary,
sentence at
David?
that point.
Is it arbitrary as to when you go into jail? So if you happen to go into jail a couple of years before a general election, then you won't be able to exercise your vote. But actually, if you go into jail just after a general election, then don't worry. Yeah. Actually, next time you'll get it. This is completely arbitrary. It makes no
hard
sense
luck,
at all.
I'm afraid. Hard luck, Barry. When you commit that crime. As for the last century, when you commit that crime, and any time in the last century, if you committed a crime, you knew If you went to prison, you would lose your vote. That is part of the deal. I have to tell you, I don't think that would make any difference to either rehabilitation or deterrence to this. It's a part of the punishment.
OK, David Davis, thank you for your time this evening. Good to have you on the programme. Former Conservative Shadow Home Secretary. My thanks to Barry Gardner as well, Labour MP for Brent North. What do you make of this?